Collar Wealth Club podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Sheena White.
And I'm your other host, Jerry Garcia.
And so today we're going to talk about the 20-mile march and how creating consistency in your business will help you scale over time.
Yes, consistency is just something that will drive all of your goals in life, no matter what it is. I mean, a lot of times people think that, there's this one big thing and there's, one thing is going to lead to all the success and all of the glory.
An overnight success. Everybody wants to be an overnight success. What they don't realize is there's literally no such thing as an overnight success. Every single person you see as an overnight success has been busting their butt for longer than you want to think. Even the ones who are young when they do it, like, you think of like Billie Eilish or even, Taylor Swift now. I mean, she's the biggest thing there is right now. But that girl has been like busting her butt since she was like 10. And she's like 35 now. So it's 25 years of busting her butt. She deserves every single dollar she's getting.
She was doing it too. I heard a funny story about her once about like when she was in high school and she was going to be on Good Morning America, and some friends of hers saw it and they had no idea she was even a musician at the time, and she was going on Good Morning America to perform. It just kind of goes to show that like people are grinding behind the scenes. People are out there doing things every day. I mean, I think the gym is the perfect example, right? You can't go to the gym for a month and expect to see results. I mean, it's really a result of, days, weeks, months, years of consistency before you see the kind of results that the people you idolize have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you have to look at not just the result, but what it took to get the result. And that's why the 20-mile march comes in. So one of my favorite books ever, Great by Choice by Jim Collins. Jim, if you ever hear this, I really want to meet you. You're my idol. Anyways, I could go on, but for real, so his book, Great by Choice, if you haven't read it, please read it. It's so good. It's probably my favorite book ever to this day. He'll bring out another one. I'll like it more. So maybe I'll like a different book better. But in this book, he talks about the 20-mile march, and he gives an example of 2 treks to the South Pole. And one was an English team, and they had more money. They had more equipment. They had a lot of like the highest end mechanical equipment to get them to the South Pole. And they had decided that when it was rainy, they were going to hunker down when like the weather was bad. Because it doesn't really rain in the South Pole, it's really snow. But
right.
When the weather is bad, they're going to hunker down. And when the weather was good, they were going to go as far and as fast as they could. And then you had the other team, which they were Danish.
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah. And they said they had sled dogs, and they had, they had different types of food, and they were going to like even eat the dogs and stuff, which sounds terrible now, but
that was part of the plan, though.
That was part of the plan. Okay. It was food. It was available. You don't have to like it. It was a long time ago. And they were going to go a certain amount every single day, rain or shine. So whether the weather was bad or the weather was good, they were going to go 20 miles. And this way they knew exactly when they would reach the pole. They knew how much food they needed, all these different things, because they were going to go that amount. And so at the end of the day, who ended up winning? Well, the Danish team totally kicked butt, and they got there first, and then they got back and survived. The English team, they got there last, and then on their way back, they ran out of food, they got lost, and they died. Sad, but true.
Yeah.
So
kind of a dark tale, but
right, yeah.
it tells the story quite well.
The ones who ate the dogs lived. So there you go. Anyway.
This is why they tell the tortoise and the hare now. It's much less dark.
Yes.
And
well, yeah, and the tortoise and the hare, they both survived that we know. That we know of. Maybe it was an Australian rabbit and he ended up not surviving. I don't know. So, the point with this and business is to say that sometimes, and I see this a lot, is not really necessarily the hunkering down and wanting to and kind of like riding out the storm, so to speak, but when the weather is nice, people just want to go. They want to grow as fast as they can and as big as they can without thinking about what happens when the weather turns. And so then what happens when the weather turns is they run out of money, they run out of resources, they have to hunker down too long, and then they die.
Right.
And that's pretty dark. And it really is. But it's the truth. And I see this so often with clients. A lot of times I get hired when they're in the mode. So I'm like, okay, let's just calm down.
I think, there's a lot of planning that goes into that consistency also, right? You know, when you talk about this particular story, the Danish team had decided, okay, here's where we're going to set our resources. We're going to place them here, which was not on the beaten path, so to speak, but it didn't seem to make sense to the other team at the time. They didn't think it made it, but he knew exactly where it was going to be because they were consistent with everything that they did. They knew exactly when they'd get there. They knew exactly how to find it. The other team had some issues finding some of their resources, which is why they ended up dying. But, you know, a lot of planning goes into achieving that kind of consistency, planning for those, you know, those darker days, the bad weather days by, you know, having your projections in mind and planning your budget accordingly, because most businesses are seasonal, you know, and so you have to plan ahead for that seasonality, because when there is a downturn, there's activities to be done. But if you haven't planned your finances properly, you're going to have a hard time coming out the other side ready to really hit it when business picks back up.
Yeah. And you want to make sure that you're planning for hitting those marks, whether, you know, the weather is good or bad, right? That it rains on all of us and the sun shines on all of us. And so you can have success even in those downturning markets. You just have to be aware of what's happening and be ready and plan ahead for keeping that 20-mile march. But part of it too is constraint on that other side, you know, not over leveraging yourself, because, you know, I've seen a few people that when it's really good, they're like, oh, yes to this job and yes to that job, but not recognizing that some of these jobs might be net 30 or net 60. So when you have a net 30 job, you're maybe getting paid 45 days later, maybe.
Yeah.
But your vendors don't want to wait that long, and your employees are not going to wait that long. So you have to be able to fund all of that. So if it's, we'll just say $1 million job, and even if you did your margins correctly and you've baked in, say, 20% margin, first of all, you probably have 10% retainage. So 10% of your net is gone anyways, or is being held for who knows how long.
Right.
So you're only going to have 10% profitability to begin with if you did your projections right, which is rare, but we'll pretend that you did it right. And so then we're going to have that 10%. But that means that 80% of that job, when it comes to materials, labor, overhead, all of the above, you have to completely front for at least a month and a half, probably 2.5 months. It's like, okay, so say the job is, say you can do $250,000 of it a month. That means literally you need $500,000 in the bank chilling for you to be able to fund that job.
Right.
So before you say yes, say to yourself, do I have $500,000? And if the answer to that question is no, you should probably rethink it. And there are ways to mitigate that. Don't get me wrong, but it's like, I always say this, it's like when I was in concrete polishing, like everybody wanted a Walmart. They didn't really think about what that meant.
Right.
So everyone was like, oh, this huge job is going to be life-changing. It's like, yeah, it could be life-changing if done correctly, or it could be life-changing in a completely different way because you will be broke and bankrupt in the middle of it, and that would be bad too. So really looking at the constraint on both sides and saying, okay, this is how far we're going to go this year. We're going to make sure we get there, but even if everything is sunny and great, we're going to stop there so that we don't overextend and overexert ourselves in a financial capacity so that we can live to do the 20 miles the next day.
Yeah. And a lot of that, is consistently having the practices of, a certain amount of your money going aside to prepare for these types of things. And this is where kind of the profit first kind of stuff plays in, where you're planning ahead for these big jobs and making sure that there's always a certain amount of money in accounts to accommodate payroll, to accommodate overhead, so that you can survive these big types of jobs, which can be life-changing. If you get that and you do a good job and everything goes smoothly, your crews are happy, the client is happy, you're happy because you're making money, and it leads to more of these types of jobs. And like you said, you have to have constraint and know when it's the appropriate time to take these jobs and when it's not, because all it takes is one bad job in these cases, and your guys aren't going to do that. They're not going to want to travel for you. They're not going to want to take on a big job because they know that they may not get paid right away or for a while, and they have bills to pay too, and they don't care about your business when it's all said and done. They care about putting food on the table for their family. And so if you're not consistently planning for these things, all of it can go away with one poorly planned execution.
Yeah, right. Just one big storm comes through and you've used up all your resources and now you can't get to the South Pole. So really focusing on that. And one of the other things that he talks about in the book is making sure you have enough resources set aside. So Microsoft is a great example of this. Bill Gates forever insisted upon having 12 months of working capital in the bank.
Which for a company the size of Microsoft is insane.
That's it. Like, I think about it, that's a crazy pants amount of money to have in the bank. But for him, he was extremely risk averse. And for him, that was how he slept at night, was he knew that no matter what, if one more dollar didn't come in, they could survive for an entire year, because he knew that his industry was very volatile. So he was like, this is how I'm going to hedge. And also having that amount of money in the bank, it made lending easier. When you have that much free cash, it makes investment easier to get. There's a whole host of other things that are so much better when you have that much money. But also just he knew he could go to sleep every single night and know, okay, I can take care of my family and all of my employees' families for an entire year without having to break a sweat. And that takes time to get that much money, but that sounds awesome.
And yeah, how do you get there? You have to consistently do it. It's not like he woke up and said, okay, we're just going to take the next 2 months worth of, revenue and put it aside. And
it doesn't work that way.
Yeah, it has to be done over time. You have to say, hey, look, we're going to scale up the amount we're putting aside every month, and, and make sure you're tracking everything. You've got your numbers, you know what you need to operate, and it takes a lot of discipline. And ultimately, consistency is just that. It's just the discipline to do what needs to be done when you don't want to do it.
Yeah. And it's just all about taking a little haircut, taking a little haircut every single check and putting it into a level of an emergency fund. And then as that fund grows and grows and grows, one day, boom, there you go. Now you have, and maybe just start with a month and then 3 months and 6 months. But even with that, it's that 20-mile march, right? It's deciding, okay, how much are we going to put in? Even if it's just 1%, if you start there, just starting with something and keeping it consistent. Because when you put it in and then you take it out and you put it in and you take it out, or like say you get quick lending and then you pay it off, but then you don't have enough money the next week, so you need to go get quick lending again. You just end up in this like never-ending cycle of bad. So it's just like, okay, let's break the cycle. Let's just stop the bleeding and create a plan moving forward to get you out of that and have it be so that it's forever instead of dipping back in every single day.
Yeah. It's not fun. It's not sexy, and we'll say this countless times throughout the course of this podcast. We don't teach get rich quick. We teach get rich right. And, a lot of what getting rich right is about discipline, is about consistency. And, a lot of times you may feel like on the front end, in the short term, you're missing out on something, but the back end is so much more worth it once you've actually, taken the time to, hey, maybe you don't buy that new thing right now. You don't need that piece of equipment. Let's just, if we want that, that's fine. You need to find a way to put aside money until you know that that money put aside is going to be fine and you can pay for that monthly payment on that new piece of equipment. Or you put enough aside so you could pay cash for it and maybe get a better deal. It's not sexy, it's not fun, but it's so much more worth it on the back end. And that is what is the big difference maker in a lot of businesses, on businesses that not only, survive, but they thrive and they succeed and they grow, is those little things. Everybody's doing the same kind of stuff on the jobs. And it's all about the differentiators on which businesses really become household names or really become big in their individual industries.
Yeah. Well, and you have to think too, so you said something interesting, like, do we need it? So I think a lot of times people confuse want with need, and they try to justify their desire by pretending that they need it.
Our children.
Well, yeah. But I see this all the time with business owners.
Oh, I know. Yeah.
And basically they're like little children with really big bank accounts, which is super scary because the reality is, do you actually need it? And most of the time, the answer is probably no.
No, and there may be, a piece of equipment that you say, hey, look, okay, maybe you don't need it right now, but what, if we can get that, we can take on a much bigger job and do it in the exact same amount of time that we're currently doing these smaller jobs on. But then you have to reevaluate, okay, now is that bigger job actually more profitable? Or are these smaller jobs more profitable? Yes, that's a big, flashy, I can tell people I worked on this Walmart or I worked on the airport or I can, but is that the same as doing, 10 small jobs in the same amount of time? Which one's bringing you more money? And that's okay to do both. But that's where the planning comes in. And that's where, okay, maybe this big piece of equipment would be great and it can help us get different types of jobs and get us in different circles. That's all well and good, but it has to be the right time for it. You can't just say, you know what, let's do it. And then you get in there and you realize that you bid it wrong. And now your margins are really low. And now you have to go back out because they don't feel like something was done right. And now this big job that you thought was going to be, a pivot point for your business turns out costing you, a ton of money.
Yeah. Or, if you said, okay, I want this, I need this piece of equipment for this job, so I'm going to go do it. But then you find out that you end up not using that piece of equipment and it's just sitting there. And so then you basically have, instead of having that be a pivot point to where you can go do other jobs, it just basically was a giant cost to that job itself. So you really have to be planning ahead. And I think that's the biggest thing too. When we go back to our South Pole example, the guy who got there and got back, he planned ahead. He went and he actually lived with the Inuit people for a while. He learned their customs. He learned how they survived in these conditions. He knew exactly how much food, and he added on, but not too much. He knew, okay, if we add in the dogs, what does that mean? Because then we'll have the dogs on the way there, and we don't need as many on the way back because everyone we eat, then we don't have to feed. All these things he accounted for in order to make sure that that was a success, even by virtue of the placement of where he decided to come to port, and all that stuff was slightly different because of the research and the planning he had done. So he didn't just decide one day, hey, let's do this. Sounds cool. Let's go to South Pole. He planned ahead for years for this. And so, really thinking in your business, how can we really be proactive in what we're doing? Stuff is going to come at you all the time, and there will be a million opportunities to squirrel, sometimes in a positive direction and sometimes not. But you have to, be the adult and say, no, this is what we're doing and this is how far we're going. And this is the plan, and we're going to stick to it even when everything is coming at you.
Yeah. And I think when we're talking about consistency, planning is probably number one. The thing you have to be, you can't react too emotionally to anything. You see that new equipment, oh, that's great. And like you said, you may use it, and this may allow you to get this one job. But if you don't make a plan for what that equipment is going to do for your business moving forward, you can get that new piece of equipment. And if this job comes up and you're like, what, I've been wanting one of these. This job is here. This job is going to, help me pay for this piece of equipment, but, make a plan for that piece of equipment moving forward. Okay, if I get this, how do I go about getting more jobs like this so that this piece of equipment doesn't just sit on the shelf for 2 years, and then the next time we need to use it, we have to get it maintenance, we have to get parts changed out because it hasn't been used, and, it ends up costing so much more. If you create a plan around what you want, and, you're always thinking forward in that regard, you can get anything you want for your business as long as you've planned ahead, as long as you've put money aside. It's the same thing we talk about when you're going to make your next hire. One of the greatest things you can do is put that salary that you're going to have to pay that person aside for a few months leading up to it. You're like, okay, we can't afford this. So now we can bring that person on. And because we've already put some of that money aside, we now have a little bit of a cushion when we bring them on to know that we can pay them, even if there's a little bit of lag in what that person does to bring more revenue to your company.
Well, yeah, because then you basically have your training budget set aside, right? Because when you hire someone, it doesn't matter who they are, what their position, their first couple months, they're costing you money.
Yeah.
And you just have to deal with that. And you have to plan ahead for that. People do not cash flow day one. And so then over time, hopefully they're cash flowing, but you have to be ready for that. And this is a great way to be ready for that. So really just planning out your 20-mile march, because every single person, every single business is going to be slightly different. It's just, what is the plan for you? What is going to help you build in a consistent manner that will help you to, really scale and have that overnight success
right.
over time.
Yeah, and consistency, man. These exercises are just teaching you to be consistent in the way that you think, and you're always thinking forward with your business. And, looking back is important to see where you've been and how you got to where you are, to see, what things have worked and what things haven't. But mostly thinking forward for every new thing that you introduce into your company. And that has to be a consistent practice for you. If you want to continue growing, continue scaling, and continue doing it in such a way that, that it's sustainable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because you can't go, you can't grow at 80% year over year over year over year. Everyone will die in your organization.
Yeah, and consistent in that manner too, right? You don't want to grow too fast, year over year if you haven't prepared for it. Now, if you've spent the last year or two preparing, saying, all right, here's what we need to do so that when we introduce this new thing or open this new service, which we think is going to jump our revenue by 50%, we've already planned ahead. We've already got roles for our current crew. We've already got people ready to come on board. We've already got the equipment in place. You got everything lined up because you've been planning ahead for that. Now you can hit that, and that big jump in your business is ready to be achieved without costing you your business's reputation.
Yeah, because you've created that foundation, right? Like in a previous episode, we were talking about like creating the foundation and how in order to go high, you first have to go low. So exactly we were talking about all those things is the creation of that foundation so you can spring up. It's like bamboo, right? I mean, it's there in the ground for like years and years and years. And then one day it's just like bazinga and it sprouts 10 feet in a week or something like that. But it wasn't just chilling. It was creating that foundation. It was creating that root structure. It was doing all the things so that it could sprout up and be, strong bamboo.
Yeah, and that's exactly what we're talking about. All these overnight successes that you see are filled with people who've behind the scenes been doing all of that underground work, building out those foundations, doing all the little things consistently over the course of several years before you really see them come on the scene or you see them starting to have success. And then all of a sudden it seems like everything happens so fast because they've been doing things for so long. There's like a meme of an iceberg, right? And it's like you see just that top 20% of the iceberg, and below is the 80% that you don't see underneath the surface. And that's the consistency, is building that underneath the surface type stuff so that when you are ready, things can spring up as quickly as you want them to.
Yeah. So just really focus on like what is going to be your 20-mile march and how are you going to create that consistency that will help you to be that overnight, not overnight success.
Yeah, and that 20-mile march may look different from, one quarter to the next or 1 year to the next. Everything, if you're constantly evaluating your business, that's going to look differently from one time frame to another. And that's all about, being that designer of your business and staying above it and always looking and having that grander vision.
Yeah, really anchoring in. So.
Absolutely.
Well, thanks so much for joining us on this episode of the Blue Collar Wealth Club, and we will catch you next time.